it's not a particularly in-depth one, but somebody worked on this before. Who was it? I don't think there's anyone on the code. Might have been Silly, maybe worked on something before, but basically we've got lots of places in the application where we look for users based on user find by any email, which finds, I mean, it will shock everyone to learn that it finds users by any email, which includes private emails, which means that in various places in the application, you could look up users based on their private email address, which could be a personal info leak. So in this case, there was a previous instance of this where they fixed it. It's a few releases back. So like sometime last year. But they found out that you can do it again by using commit trailers. So when you're doing your commit message, you could mention a user by email, gets picked up in Banzai, and tries to find the user on GitLab. So it does like the little hover over name avatar, shows the user. So initially I just went and fixed that, but we also found that you can look them up. It also it looks up avatars by the same thing. So you'd then get a user's private avatar and you could still figure out where their profile was, if that makes sense. So I've changed it to, thankfully this security issue was actually concise, which is the first one I've had in months where it's like less than 4,000 words long. So that was nice. And it's not particularly difficult or weird to look at. So the actual fix is quite straightforward. Basically, I've changed these usages. So it was in this one, in the Banzai commit trailers filter file. And all I've really changed, so this is where it was picking up link to user or email. I've changed it so that it only looks users up by their public email. Turns out there's been a lot of method change in this area for quite a while. I initially did a merge request that used a method that doesn't exist, which was a weird one for me, because when I looked at the history of the file, there was like a better method for this which no longer exists, but I used it and it's since gone since these changes were made and since the security fix was put in last year for the initial version of this. Apparently the implementation has changed since that security fix. So I first replicated the original security fix, but none of that stuff exists anymore, which was interesting. So just using a built-in method and calling first on it, I don't particularly like that, but it saves introducing tons of new code into the thing. It's just using the existing method in that regard. And that's effectively all this fix is just changing it to that. And so it means that people can't be looked up in particular by their commit email, which is often private, and they can only be looked up by their public email address if they've set it. Bigger part of this is mostly adding support into the tests, but particularly around avatars. So where is he? Rohit noticed that my initial fix was still finding their avatar, even though it was just linking to their email address. Luckily, I actually do know something about the avatar system, because the exact point at which this change is implemented is the same place where I implemented caching for avatar lookups in the past. And somewhere in here, where is it? There we go. So yeah, it's now swapped over to just not doing that, because in theory, it feels a little bit weird for me to still just look people up by like their gravatars, but that's technically a totally public service. So if they have a gravatar for their like private commit email, I think that's totally fine. And so it just looks up, it basically defaults back to what it would be doing if there wasn't a user found for it. And the added bonus is that this probably is a speed improvement as well, because we do a lot of this all over the site where we look users up by email address. And in certain places like the network graph, it's actually hugely inefficient, where we're passing like 1,000 email addresses and looking up an avatar for all 1,000 people. And it's happening individually because of how it works. So there's actually quite a few places where it can be quite slow. So any speed improvements in this area, like limiting how many avatars get rendered and stuff, actually helps. So it might have a side effect in other parts of the application. Like we might see fewer avatars from the GitLab thing popping up in places, but if it's valid in one place, it's kind of valid everywhere else. They should only be looking up people's avatars by email address with a public email address. If they've supplied the user, it's fine, because you can where is it? The actual call to get the avatar. It's a bit of a mess.
I think it was underneath the other one. I think
was it?
No, sorry. There it is. The code we find the line that you changed to public.
Yeah.
Oh, there it is there.
Yeah.
Oh no, sorry, that's an if. Okay. Avatar icon for
user.
Sorry.
Basically, this is essentially how it works elsewhere. There is a way of calling avatar icon for user, and you pass it a user. But there's actually there's another variant of. Oh no, there it is. Yeah, here you go. So when you're calling user avatar, you can either supply a user or you can supply an email, and it will look it up differently. So if we already have a user found in somewhere, so like in the application itself, it will still work as normal. But it's only in those situations where it's having to look up by an email address that it will now only look up public email addresses. But yeah, it's effectively an extremely boring fix with just refresh that so all the extra lines go away. Yeah, effectively the fix is that, and then all the rest are just spec fixes to make it work. It's another quite boring security fix, but there might be more of these, because we do seem to call find by any email quite a lot in the application, and we probably shouldn't. So that might be something that we have to create a new issue about. But yeah, effectively that's it. It's both of my security issues this month were effectively one-line changes, but it did break quite a lot of specs, this one, so it's not too bad to actually have finished it in the end. But yeah, are there any questions about it? Because that's kind of all it is. Yeah, Igor?
Yeah, actually, my question is about, as far as I remember, at first this issue was severity 4, and now I see it's severity 2. Just curious if you remember what was the trigger of bumping the severity.
I don't actually know. Yeah, you're right. It was severity 4. Well, you'll have to ask Sean because he changed it.
Yeah, I'll have to. I didn't put a note, did I? Yeah, good question.
Okay, I was just curious, but it's actually fine. Yeah.
I think.
Yeah, I normally put a note, so I don't know why.
It was mentioned in the planning at the same time, I think, wasn't it? So, oh, that's just a huge list.
Yeah, it's just a list. Yep.
Yeah, I can't speed read that to find exactly where it is, but yeah, I think as far as like the actual issue goes itself, I actually don't know what the original one was. Oh, that's just the release post. That's not got a huge amount of useful info in it. I don't know if the CVE mentions it. Oh, there we go. This was resolved. Oh, there's the, no, that's not it. When did this get solved? That seems to be an unrelated merge request. But it got fixed at some point. Sure.
Yeah.
So just if I understand correctly, so basically, how is the user providing the private email? How is
Yeah,
the
it's
attacker?
interesting. So you basically, when you do a here's the good example, but basically someone can like mention somebody else by email address
On the commit.
in the commit, yeah, because they resolved it in a few other places, like I think in issues or merge requests or something, but we might need to check that. But yeah, in the commit message, you could do that because it goes through Banzai. They all get looked up in this way.
But isn't that public anyway? Oh, well, not public, but public to anyone who's got the repo, the commit log.
Yeah, I think
or do we somehow do it?
I would personally say the attack vector for this is not the most. I don't think it's the biggest problem in the world, but I think the general sort of gist is that you could mention somebody, like you wanted to check that you've got their valid like private email address or something like that, and you can verify it that it is their email. Igor?
Yeah, just to avoid confusion, maybe I misheard, but I think Sean asked where the private email is specified for a user. Then if that was the question, then it's the user in the user's profile. Yeah, just to avoid the confusion.
Yeah, I guess I probably change the message because if you have access to the commit logs, right, which if you have access to the repo, basically you have the commit logs and then has all the email addresses in there. Oh, so using that email address, you can try and identify who the person is. Is that the attack?
Yeah, so what would be a good example of it? Like, you know how like if people steal credit card info, they do like a small transaction to test that the card actually works. You can kind of use the platform to do that to validate. I mean, it'd be a bit of a faff, but you can basically validate that you have the private email address of someone that might not be like publicly obvious. So you could use it to dox people effectively.
Okay.
And you can eventually find their name and stuff on their profile, right? So
yeah, okay. Yeah, fair enough. Okay. Yep.
Yeah. So I think there's potential for it. But it's very much more a GitLab.com problem, I think, than a private one. And yeah, potentially even less so in that regard. But especially, well, I suppose actually on GitLab.com, because we have a lot of people who probably have old accounts and everything who just don't use anymore, like open source people, etc. There is a potential of looking people up by quite old email addresses that they maybe thought they'd left behind and things like that. So yeah, it's a bit of an odd one. I think it is an exploit, but there might be more of these. So this is just the most recent one. Maybe we do need to proactively go and search the code base for use of this method to see if there are any other ways. The fact that I've done this change in one part of Banzai is interesting, but it's only the commit trailers part. So this is just the commit trailers filter, but there, in theory, should be other parts of Banzai that do the same thing. So maybe, because that's just commit trailers. I mean, in theory, it could happen in commit messages too.
Yeah.
That might be what the old fix is. Could happen in, what else do we put through Banzai? Maybe diffs? Like, that'd be kind of interesting. Don't think that would happen, but it's a possibility, I guess.
It's because with public email, in many cases, may return nothing, right?
Yes. Yeah. Basically.
And so then the avatar will be that default avatar symbol.
Well, by default, it will look up the gravatar for
email.
Yeah, so we'll be sending quite a lot more traffic to gravatar now, I guess. But Yeah, so it'll do that by default, and then I think Gravatar by default returns like the little hexagony, you know, procedurally generated thing. If it can't find anybody, so yeah, it sort of fails through that way. I think it's going to result in a lot fewer avatars being seen.
Yeah, it's a bit, bit unfortunate, really.
Yeah, it's. Yeah,
But
I might
yeah,
actually
no, I get it.
label
Yeah.
this as breaking change, to be honest, which I don't think I've done yet. So I might put it in as a UI breaking change. But yeah, effectively, if people want their avatars to show up in the specific situation where it's looked up by email address.
Yeah, maybe it's worth adding a note to the user docs, because people might be wondering what's happened to their avatar.
Yeah, I think if I stick it in the breaking changes in the security issue, it should go in the release post for it, which should be enough, I think. But yeah, basically, it will only affect it if it's in an area where they're looked up by email, which, from my experience, is a few really specific areas. So commits and anything that passes data from a commit to do that sort of stuff, and things like the network graph, which does it.
Oh yeah.
I think there's somewhere else, but basically a few of the really old endpoints. On a lot of the new stuff, we tend to look users up first, and because we're trying to reduce the number of queries, so we do quite a lot of user lookups first and then merge the data in. But on some of those older endpoints, we do just do a lot of lookups by email address for various other info tied to commits and things. And that's where it might look a bit different. So it shouldn't have a huge effect. It's like it's not going to break avatars for the whole site.
Yep. Yep.
But yeah, you might see a few more isometric thingies. Geometric. It's probably the right word.
It is.
Like in the corner, isn't it? Sorry?
Geometric is what you're looking for.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Robert. That was very interesting. Does anyone else have any last questions before we wrap the meeting up? Great. Thank you very much. Have a nice day. See ya.